All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the MARESUNEX seminar. My name is Dr. Peter Mullner. I co-lead this seminar with Dr. Steve Crowley and Dr. Richard Elliott. We have a little bit a change in schedule today. Dr. McLing was scheduled to fly into Boise this morning. Sometimes flights go against plans, and he stayed in California, was able to get into a hotel room about 30 minutes ago, and just on time, we are all ready for his presentation. So a little run of show as always. We will have a quick introduction. Then Dr. McLing will give us a 40-minute presentation. We will go briefly into small group discussion. Dr. McLing, if you can, after your talk, also join the breakout room, since we have a number of students that participate remotely today, and they would like to talk with you then a little bit for 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll get into the big classroom back in the full room for a Q&A.
Very good.
Wonderful. And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Travis McLing, who is the Chief Geologist and Directorate Fellow at the Idaho National Laboratory, INL. Dr. McLing has been working in the field of geology and geochemistry since 1988. He completed his PhD research in rare earth element geochemistry. Dr. McLing also serves as INL's chief geologist and supports research in critical minerals, geothermal and geological hydrogen. Dr. McLing has more than 30 years of experience developing, growing, and leading multi-institutional interdisciplinary research in geoscience-related fields. He also serves as INL's relationship manager for DOE, Department of Energy, Geothermal Technologies and Fossil Energy, and leads INL's Critical Mining Minerals Research Team. Dr. McLing also serves on the Utah Legislature Critical Mineral Board. And with this, please help me welcome Dr. McLing.
Thank you so much for, whenever I hear my bio, I always think I should pare it down and make it embarrasses me a little bit, but I've had a great career over now 35 years of experience doing this kind of work. And I want to share a little story before I get into my slide deck. And we're talking about minerals today and really trying to help understand what makes them critical and where are our catch points, what are our threats, what are our vulnerabilities, and kind of set that table for you a little bit. I've given thousands of presentations over my career. I've been at hundreds and hundreds of meetings. But this week in California, I was invited to a very large investment capital meeting and was a keynote speaker here. And because the subject matter was critical and strategic minerals. And these investment type folks that direct where money, venture capital goes into industrial and private sector ventures, wanted to hear what the mineral story was. And so I never thought that would happen in my career. I never thought that the financial institutions and organizations would ever want to hear what a rock licker had to say. But I find it was refreshing. It was interesting, and it means that things are changing. That not only does the nation understand that these metals are incredibly important to us, but that the financial sector understands that there's a dollar to be made there, and that their financing mechanisms need to be adjusted to account for it. So I just wanted to share that with you to let you know that the pool is getting bigger by the minute in terms of folks who are interested. It's no longer a few of us waving our hands, asking to be rescued off of a desert island. Today we're going to talk about critical minerals, and I get a question often, what makes them critical? And there's a lot of verbiage that gets tossed around out there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and try to set the table so you understand the baseline of what we're talking about and give you more understanding with respect. I start with this presentation at nearly every, this slide with nearly every presentation I give, which is that currently, as it stands today, the Western world, and in particular the United States, is building our empire our technology base, our industrial prowess, our military on the backs of people who don't have another choice, meaning that there are people out there whose only choice in life are to earn a couple dollars a day collecting minerals in an artisanal fashion. And some may say, well, they've always done it that way. They haven't always done that in the sense that a giant monopoly like China is creating the only opportunity for them to earn a bare living is to provide them with nodules of cobalt or gold. The picture on the left is from Malawi. It's a gold deposit in Malawi. The picture in the middle, those are all DRC pictures. And the book that really changed my life was Cobalt Red, and I'll show it in a second here. But if you haven't read Cobalt Red, I always say that 2 books in my life made me cry. One was Old Yeller, that book about the boy and his dog, and then Cobalt Red. And I realized that my technology, the ability that I have to even sit here right here today in San Diego, California, and present to you is because of people who oftentimes, more than likely, don't have any other choice to supply the metals that we need. Now, there is a cacophony of books out there. I've picked a few of the ones that I thought were really impactful to me, but since I've created this slide, there are probably 3 times this number of books that I've read on this subject. And I would encourage you, all of you who want to know and understand a little bit more about the dynamics of the system, why it's set up the way it is to go out and pull some of these books. You can get many of them books on tape, or I'm an old guy, I guess. It's ebooks, and you can listen to them and begin to understand. The one thing I demand of the folks that I talk to is that whatever decision you make, whether you're pro-mining or anti-mining, whether you're pro-development in the U.S. or anti-development in the U.S., you need to have the information to make that decision. I cannot abide a decision that's made in the absence of information that simply says we don't want to look at it, therefore it's okay. What's happening to build our Western economy is on the backs, like I said, of countries that don't have a presence or a voice internationally. So not that I'm saying that I please don't understand that I'm not saying that mining is bad. I'm saying quite the opposite. I'm just saying that we as a nation need to understand the consequences of the decisions we make, and they aren't without significant consequences. Now, we'll start this story back in 1996. In fact, let me roll the story back a little bit further, and we'll go back into about 1990. I was just finishing up my bachelor's degree, and I had always wanted to be, since I found out that geology was something you could earn a living at, I always wanted to be a mine geologist. I wanted to find ore deposits. I wanted to characterize them. I wanted to help understand them. And in about 1990, I started the process of looking at a graduate program, and I had a really nice offer to do a master's thesis on an ore deposit in Idaho. And I had a couple of my professors at the school I was at the time, which was Idaho State University, come to me and say, Trav, you got a bright future ahead of you. Said you really ought to consider what path you take, and that is that I had 2 young children. My wife and I had wanted to start we'd wanted to settle down and to build a stable life for ourselves after so many years of education. And I took a look at the metal markets. I looked at the low metal prices, and essentially it was pointed out to me that unless you want to change jobs 12 times in the next 20 years and live in foreign countries, you're probably going to have a very difficult time being a mine geologist in the United States. I counseled with my wife, and we decided to do it a little bit differently. But it all has to do with this whole story that's taken me 35 years to get to where I'm at today talking to you. Started 36 years ago, back in about 1990, when I took a look at the mine economy and realized that mines were shutting down in the United States. We had won the Cold War. The dividend for the Cold War is we no longer had to dig metals from the dirt, and we were going to clean up the ecosystem, and we were going to let somebody else bear that burden. That ultimately was manifest in 1996 by the dissolution of the Bureau of Mines. Now you may think, what is the Bureau of Mines and why is it so important? The Bureau of Mines was by far and away, head and shoulders, without any peer, the most significant technology developer for mining and mining engineering and mine safety in the world. They put out more patents than any other federal organization in history. they were quite literally the bully on the block when it came to this. And the United States had developed all the capabilities that were being used around the world. In fact, in 1996, when we decommissioned the Bureau of Mines and rolled a fraction of it into the Department of Energy, China saw an opening, and they quite literally came in and they bought the equipment that was needed in order for them to build their mining industry. In particular, we'll talk about rare earths. The technology was developed here in the United States. They bought the equipment, transported it to China, and started building their empire that way. The question was again posed back in 2024. So remember that it took us 30 years to get to this position that we're at now. And then in 2024, the U.S. Election revived the question: do we need a Bureau of Mines, or do we need something that acts in proxy like the Bureau of Mines? And there's a lot of anxiety as a result of some of this inattention we had over the last 30 years on dependence of foreign resources for critical minerals. And it's not just that they're foreign resources, it's that they're control resources. So I want to just kind of lay that groundwork, is that we didn't just find ourselves here by happenstance. It was quite strategic. We had decided that at the end of the Cold War, we didn't need to do the dirty work anymore. And therefore, we find ourselves now scrambling to catch up. Now, one of the consequences of the Bureau of Mines going down, and I want you to just look at the growth trends right here, and you can see these are enrollment trends in mining schools. So the one is Colorado School of Mines, which is the preeminent mining school in the country, and you can look at how many students are enrolling in those programs. The Canadians, who have always had a pretty strong mining program, you can see that they peaked in about 2016, and you can see that the decline has been precipitous since then. If you follow those curves out, they go to zero, which means that we're aging out our mining and technology capability in the United States and in the West, including Canada. And it's happening rapidly. Right now, we're about 130,000 skilled workers underwater, meaning that's how many we're short to meet the needs that we have coming up in the near term. And those are trained engineers, mining geologists, metallurgists, chemical engineers, et cetera. It's not counting the skilled workers we need to operate the machinery and to extract the minerals from the subsurface. So this is a sobering slide for me. And so I want to show it to you, since we're at Boise State today and we're talking a little bit about this. The rise of China in prominence in technology and in minerals is not by happenstance. Deng Xiaoping, who, if you're as old as me, you remember he was after Chairman Mao, he was the most prominent Chinese leader. Back in the 1990s, he made a statement that's famous, and I use it all the time. He said, and I quote, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." And it was China's strategic vision to leverage the vast rare earth deposits as crucial resources for modern technology, a policy continuing to shift from Mao's focus on sheer steel quality to strategic mineral dominance for the 21st century and beyond for defense. So they laid this plan out. They said, listen, we're not endowed with great hydrocarbon resources, but we do have these metals. Now, if you go back and you're a geologist of some gray hair like I am, you'll know that in the 1990s, 1980s, 1970s, rare earths were not a commodity. They were not a mineral resource. They were something we used to define how ore bodies were emplaced in magmatic systems and volcanoes. So we looked at them. You could buy rare earths from some place like Fisher Scientific. You could buy 100 grams or 500 grams of the material, but you could not go to a market and buy a ton of rare earth oxide. And it's important to know that China is not looking for an internal rate of return. Profit isn't their motivation here. I'll even go as far as saying that China isn't really motivated to make money on their rare earths, but what they're really moving on is industrial metals. That's really their focus point. Rare earths just happen to be a way in which they can control the rest of the world. They are seeking broader strategic goals. Trust me, China gets cobalt because they're looking for copper. right? China has gallium because they're mining bauxite for aluminum. It is these secondary minerals that they require their industry to recover that it creates such a problem for us. But they're really about those industrial metals that are so important for building a strong economy. And it just so happens that they can exert huge control on the rest of the globe with those other metals. So we get the question all the time: strategic materials, strategic minerals, strategic elements. What are they, and what makes them strategic? And here I have a couple definitions for you. A mineral, it's a mineral, element, or substance that, quote, has high risk of supply chain disruption and serves as an essential function in national defense, defense weapons, platforms, spacecraft systems, satellites, and has a particular strategic significance to government or nation, often in time of war. And I will add, because I borrowed this from my DOW colleagues, is that it also has a significant role and is threatened in the high-tech AI ML energy side of things as well. So that's really why they're strategic. And I'll talk some more about this in just a second. Now, people ask me all the time, well, why don't we just go mine these? What's critically important to remember for the high tech and defense is these metals are not expensive. Most of the metals that we talk about are sold by the kilogram, they're sold by the pound, they're sold by the ton. So they're not terribly expensive. They are just absolutely crucial. So if we take a look here, look at an F-35, look at an Arleigh Burke cruiser or a destroyer, and look at a new Virginia-class submarine. I took all of these numbers and crunched some calculations. So for an F-22, it requires about 920 pounds of rare earths in total. There's just a few represented there. For a big destroyer, it takes about 5,200 pounds. And for a Virginia-class submarine, it's about 9,200 pounds. So what does that really mean, 9,200 pounds? Well, that's more than I can put in my pickup. So that's a lot, right? Well, compared to the mass and the size of a Virginia-class submarine, it's really not that much. So do the math. Take a look at I took the average of the highest two priced rare earths and did the calculation on them. It amounts in a Virginia-class submarine that costs between $3 and $3.5 billion to build. It's about 0.015% of the total cost. So we say they're critical, but they're not valuable, right? So it's not like gold or it's not like silver, but you can't do without them. And it really goes back to the presence of these elements in the crust. They're not particularly rare either in terms of their occurrence. So here's something that I think is really interesting, and maybe it's only interesting because it's my geology eye. Is that when I talked a little moment ago about byproducts or minerals that come as a result, or metals that come as a result of mining base elements like aluminum or iron or nickel or zinc or copper, you can see that when you mine the primary elements that make people money, there are in the waste products or in those rocks also all the other metals that we need to drive the critical minerals economy. What happens to those minerals? Well, if you're in China, because the government has mandated, you have to recover those minerals, regardless of the cost. And I use minerals and metals interchangeably here, so I apologize for that. But what I talk about here is the metals. They're required to recover them, and then so they have a stockpile, even if they're at very, very low levels. So if you look at platinum there on the about the 10 o'clock on the chart, you see osmium there. Osmium is a metal for which we produce about 2.5 to 3 metric tons across the globe every single year. There are no osmium deposits, but it is a byproduct of mining nickel platinum mines. So in China, they pull it out and they supply the only supply for the world for osmium. And that's the true for the case of most of these others. When you talk to big companies like Glencore, like BHP, like Rio Tinto, like Newmont, and you say, well, listen, we could solve all of our problems if you would just pull these metals from your feedstocks and from your waste streams. And the answer that you often come back is the risk is way too high. So they mine gold or they mine silver, they mine copper, and recovering something like a rare earth or indium or any of these other kind of metals may represent 1/100th of a percent of their total cost basis in terms of their total business. That's way too little to drive the risk necessary to put in a whole circuit to pay for all of the infrastructure it requires to pull out a metal that has very low concentrations. So these miners do really excellent job, and they produce their metals that they are keyed in on, and they do a very good job of it. But when your profit margin is near zero to pull out these other metals, unless you're mandated to do it, like in China, you just simply can't afford to do it. And that's why we find ourselves in the problem that we're in today. It's not their fault. It's just simply a matter of doing business and managing risk. Sorry, I've got a duplicate here. Okay, I have a couple quotes here I want to go over really quickly. I like this one here. It says, if we are going to cover the volume and range of critical mineral needs industry requires, quote, we need stronger public-private partnerships and more agile technology development. We must look at the entirety of the supply chain from ore deposits, extraction to refining through recycling. And then it goes on to say national laboratory research needs to be better integrated into the mining technology needs. And that's what we're doing now in the federal government, is that they're linking those of us who work at the national labs with the industry partners. But I want you to go back and just think about that. We need to look at the entirety of the supply chain from ore deposits to extraction. So right now, if I was endowed with Elon Musk kind of money and I decided, you know, Travis, we're going to make a difference. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put a mine in, and we're going to mine a metal or metals and put it into the supply chain. Well, number one is it would take me more than a decade, maybe two, to get the mine going. And number two is there's no place to sell it. The only place I could take the concentrate is to ship it back to China for them to process and send us as a refined metal. Okay, so that creates a problem. Well, let's say I decided I was going to refine it on my property. Well, who's going to buy it? What standard does it need to be? How many nines does it need to be? 0.99% or 0.999999% purity? Well, what's the standard? Nobody really knows that. And so from rock to final product, that supply chain is missing in the United States almost entirely. And we need to link those things together so that we can have the supply chain from the ore deposit all the way down to the final disposition of the metal. And so this isn't about fixing mining. It's about fixing the supply chain. 2 years ago, we had 2 copper smelters in the United States. Today, we have 1. We have not built a new smelter or refining facility in the United States for over 40 years. For my entire adult life, we haven't had a new one. And that creates a problem for us. So fixing this isn't simply throwing money at a miner or throwing money at a processor, because you have to link the entirety. Right now, if we do the mining in the United States, I always use the metaphor that we lose the football game in the fourth quarter instead of in the first quarter, because we bear all of the environmental liabilities, yet we send it off to another country for them to upgrade it and sell it back to us at a premium. I'll cover this really quick here. Market instability remains the most important factor inhibiting domestic production. It's pure and simple. U.S. miners and Western miners will mine if there's a dollar to be made. But if there is not a dollar to be made, they absolutely will not take a loss doing it. While permitting reforms remain the most pressing issue, Western countries face 2 additional challenges. First, the lack of experimental knowledge compared to those that have learned how to operate, optimize, and process facilities through a willingness to operate at subscale at a loss, meaning that we don't have the ability in this country to produce metals that are not, say, copper. We produce 22 million tons of copper globally. Yet gallium, we only require about 50 tons of that globally to fill the needs. We don't have the economy of downscale, meaning we can't operate a recovery process at a profit that only produces, the amount of material, the amount of metal that you could produce in your garage. So this is another problem, is the economy of scale is we go big in the West, and really in some of these cases we need to go smaller. I talked about this earlier, I alluded to this, is that I always use rare earths here because it's common and people hear it in the news, but rare earths are not rare at all. They exist at about the same concentration in the Earth's crust as copper. What is rare is the geologic processes that concentrate them, meaning that their magmatic and hydrothermal processes that concentrate them represent only about 0.1% of all volcanic activity on the surface of the Earth. So the processes that allow them to be concentrated into ore bodies is exceptionally rare. But there is plenty of them out there, and it's just a matter of finding the ones that have the concentrations high enough. In mining, they say grade is king, that is, concentration of the rock is king. It's absolutely true. Rare earths are particularly rare because the processes that concentrate them are rare and don't occur commonly in the geologic system, but also because separating them one from another, they're like having 15 twins. They all look alike and they all behave very similar, and separating one from another is very, very difficult and often requires hundreds, if not thousands, of circuits to separate nearest neighbors from each other. All right, so the nexus of the problem is, do we have the deposits in the United States? We absolutely have them. So if you take a look at our major states and territories, you can see that we have lots of deposits that contain these elements. So it's just a matter of being able to put things together, the financing and the permitting and the market in place to do it. So it's not because we don't have the metals, it's because we currently can't mine them at a profit. This is just another example. It shows these are existing mines or old mines, brownfield sites, where the metals that are on the right there from the list of critical minerals, where they can be found and where they can be mined. So they're in our neighborhood, they're in our backyard, they're all over the West, they're all over the East Coast as well. And Alaska is particularly well endowed with them. I'll touch on this very briefly, so I don't, I know I'm down to about 10 minutes here. The supply chain is pretty, this is a kind of like a Sankey diagram here, but it shows the supply chain that China has and where they're exploiting their dominance. Look at beneficiation, that is preparing the ores. They do about 60% of all of the beneficiation in the world. Separations, they do 80%. Refining, 75%, and that's everything from aluminum to cobalt to copper. Purified metals, they provide 80% of the world's supply. Finished EV motor magnets, when I did this slide, put it together, I think this was back in 2023, that number now is closer to 85%. China is moving past the days of providing raw materials to the West. Now they're in a position now where they want to provide refined products to the West. An EV motor is worth way more than a pound of neodymium. So that's really where they're moving, and that's why when we're so far behind, we're trying to solve the problem they solved in the 1990s and early 2000s, while they're moving on to the solutions that they're devising for the 2030s and 2050s. But those numbers are staggering for any one country. I grew up in the era when OPEC was able to hold the Western world in its clutches by cutting off or reducing oil supply. I remember lines to fill up your cars, even living in the Western United States, like I did in the Intermountain West. You could fill up your car on even days or odd days, depending on your license plate number. And China has even more control on the metal supply than the Middle East has on oil. That's sobering. So here's where the problem comes into real focus: investment gap in critical minerals. So the historical investments are shown there in that, I guess it's kind of an orangey color. I'm a lumper, not a splitter, so I'm going to call it an orangey color on the bottom. The required investments are shown on the top. So this number was pulled from 2024 and estimated based on the National Mining Association. We require almost $35 billion worth of investment in metal technology and recovery. Our total investments that year was about $4.5 billion. So we're about an order of magnitude short of what we need to be able to be on the leading edge of developing the technologies of tomorrow for our metal security. I don't want to beat a dead horse here on this, but this just goes to show you that the PRC's global market share and supply of rare earths as of 2023, the most recent data I had available to me, you can see there in mining, rare earth oxides, rare earth metals, alloys and powders, neodymium, iron, boron, magnets. I just selected a few of them here, but you can see those numbers are pretty large. And for a country that doesn't have a huge amount of mineral endowment, and China does have mines, but it is not the Africa of the world, to control nearly 70% of all mining activities on the globe is stunning. Who controls the world's commercial or the world's critical materials? You can just look at it right here, and I won't go through all of these in detail, but look how often that the red PRC number comes up. If you look, the American flag shows up on one. We are independent producers. We produce all of our own supply and about half of the world's supply of beryllium, and that's from one mine in northwestern Utah. Okay, so we're not even in the game here. Now, I talked about this. Just does a good job of illustrating what I talked about a moment ago, which is really the metals for China isn't about as much about profit as is about control. So advantage metals, so if you look at them, I've listed a few of them here, including germanium, indium, fluorite, bismuth, antimony, graphite. These are advantage metals. Those are the metals that China has an advantage over the rest of the world on. And so they can control the price, they can control the distribution, they can control who gets them, who doesn't, how much they get. And then they have shortage metals. And this is where, these are metals here where China feels that they are somewhat vulnerable. Iron, manganese, chrome, copper. And it's why they've made such a huge push, for instance, in the copper in the last decade and a half, is to try to secure those supply chains. So when I look at metal supply, I look at, okay, where are we going to get it? How much do we need? Do we have the mineral endowments to do it? Can we process it? When China looks at metals, from a government point of view, they look at how can they control the economies and how can they control what materials they sell into the global marketplace. In 2010, China was a bit player in electric cars. Today, they produce more electric cars than any other nation. They're using their materials as an advantage over us, and they're underselling. So not just underselling on minerals, they're underselling on batteries. They're underselling on cars. I went out last year, and for my boat, I wanted to put a new battery, a lithium iron phosphate battery in my boat. And I looked around. I could find one producer in the United States, and I could off of Amazon. There were hundreds of producers in China. They simply overwhelmed the rest of the world and the economy's ability to produce. This is a terrible slide, and I struggled and tried to illustrate kind of the scale of the problem that we're facing. So if you look at iron ore. And these blocks are to scale, but I got to come up with a better way of showing everybody this. But we mine, in the world, we mine about 2.5 billion tons of iron ore. Okay, compare that to gallium, which we mine about 100 tons globally. Copper, we mine 22 million tons of copper globally. The United States produces about 8% of the global copper supply. The numbers are quite staggering. You can tell why the big companies are in iron while they're in nickel, zinc, manganese. It's because the mass is so large. I could go out and I could open up a new world-class copper mine and it wouldn't do anything to the copper price. But I open up one mine and processing facility for germanium, and I will kill the market. And so the scale becomes a problem for us, is that we don't need 2.5 billion tons of critical elements. In some cases, we need tons. And so how do you deal with that when everything that we've built since World War II is built on scale, processing 45, 50, 80,000 tons a day through a single plant? That becomes a problem to us. So again, I don't often apologize for slides, but I'll apologize for this one because it just doesn't show the scale and the magnitude of the problem that I wanted to show you. But it's many, many, many orders of magnitude different between the base metals and precious metals compared to our critical metals. Now, Africa, I started out the slide deck talking about our role and responsibilities as stewards of our economy and stewards of just humankind in the world. And so why has Africa risen to such prominence? Oftentimes when we look in school, we see the map of the globe and it's been smashed out into a two-dimensional plane. And so we take a look and we say, oh, the United States is as big as Africa is on this map. Well, the reality is, and I love this slide that I put together, it shows all of the countries, a lot of the countries of the developed world fit nicely right inside of Africa. So Africa, not only is it incredibly well endowed with minerals, but it is huge. And when you're huge, just by sheer coincidence, you have lots and lots of the metals that we need in the world. Even look at a country like China, which is massive. You can see that China only fills up about half of the continent of Africa. Africa is prominent because it's large, and it's prominent because it's been blessed and endowed with great mineralogy, but it has problems that it hasn't been endowed with great governments. And so as a result, you can have countries like China that go in and do negotiations that seem good on the front end, but end up hurting the economies and hurting the people of the countries in Africa, for instance, on the back end. The same thing's happening in Malaysia and Indonesia. If you ever want to read something interesting, read about the nickel exports in Indonesia and how the Chinese manipulated that market to get a hold of their nickel. Africa's prominent, and it's a big deal. When we think the United States, well, we can do everything, we can solve all the problems. The reality is that there are places that are much larger and have way more of these metals than we do. And so we have to be cognizant of that, because it means that we have to compete with a continent like Africa. And perhaps the answer is to go in and help them mine and raise them up where we need to, as opposed to having them be subservient to Western interests or to Asian interests. All right, domestic metal production. This is a big something. This is where it grinds my gears out, and I'll wrap up here really quick. We have to improve. So these are active mines in the United States. So you take a state like Wyoming. Now, they have a lot of mines because they mine coal, but coal is a low-value product. It's a carbon-based deposit. They have one small mine in the southeastern part of the state that is mining a metal. You take a look at Idaho and Montana and New Mexico and Texas and the whole central part of the country. We can do way better than this, folks. It's simply a matter of will. Do we want to? And we have to overcome that loss of kinetic energy that happened back in the 1990s and reinvigorate our mining industry. And that doesn't mean that we mine like we did in the 1920s, 40s, and 50s. It means we mine today with the kind of technology and the kind of stewardship that our population demands, so that we have free-flowing streams, we have clean water, we have clean air. New mines today are not even the same beasts that they were in the old days. Even mines that are operated today that were operating back in the 1900s and 1920s, like the Bingham mine in Kennecott's mine down in Utah, they're completely different beasts, and their level of environmental stewardship is completely different. So, like I said, we can do better. We have room to improve. I'm going to skip through this one here real quick. I'm going to end with this one, with this slide. Now, I have another 20 slides I could go into, but I know I've taken up all of our time. We want to have a discussion. But how do we overcome this problem? Some of the people I talked to yesterday at this finance meeting, some said, well, Pandora's box is open and we can't get it closed again. We've lost this deal. I don't think that's the case. If you look back in World War II, Korea, World War I, we actually changed the world and began to produce the metals to defeat oppression all across the globe. The same thing with uranium. We produce about 5% of our uranium in the United States. The rest comes to us through Kazakhstan and enrichment from Russia until just recently. We led the world in uranium production until the megatons to megawatts program took over, and we got lazy and forgot to produce the uranium we need for our clean energy today. So we can diversify and expand the supply chain. That's going to require a bit of a pain threshold, right? We're going to have to be able to overcome China's ability to suppress the market, right? So they can lower the price of any given metal to a point where it's below our production cost and can drive us out of the marketplace. So that's going to require some sort of government assurity to get to where we need to be. develop alternatives. There aren't always alternatives, but in some cases there are alternatives that aren't as hard to get to, and we can use them instead. So instead of cobalt, we're using phosphate now in some of the batteries, and they work very well. Material and manufacturing efficiency. Because we're behind China and the rest of the world, we get the opportunity to build new processing plants that are state-of-the-art, that are using AI technology, that don't waste materials, use reagents and processes highly efficiently, like post-World War II, when we rebuilt the industrial sectors across the globe. We can build those new state-of-the-art facilities in the United States that can outcompete our foes. Circular economy. We can't recycle our way out of this problem today, but perhaps when my grandchildren are of my age, that we can reach a point where recycling is a major component of our economy, and we can put those metals, because they can be recycled infinitely. And then enabling activity, cross-cutting functions, utilizing technology, new technology. Instead of mining maybe 45,000 tons of ore in a day at really low grade, we can use technology today to mine 10,000 tons of ore of higher grade. So we put less material through the plants, but recover more of the metal. We can stockpile. We can have a revolving door, meaning that you can buy into a stockpiling program and you can buy from that. Perhaps the federal government puts in tolling processing plants, like places like Idaho National Lab and other places where these smaller market metals, in terms of their total mass needed, they can bring that ore to a place like INL, have it processed, and it can meet the supply chain. For germanium, I mean, we don't need 40 mines for germanium, but we need a supply chain that produces a few hundred metric tons of germanium for the United States economy and military system. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and escape out of this, and I'm going to try to see if I can get back to unsharing my screen. Okay. And I apologize, I talked like a teenager that stole a cookie out of the cookie jar, but I had to cover a lot of material.
First of all, for this wonderful talk. We'll take now 5 minutes to discuss in our groups the questions, compare and contrast what we heard today with what we have learned throughout this semester. What did we learn more? Where did we add on to it? How does it compare to what we heard from other speakers? And we'll get back with questions to Dr. McLing in 5 minutes. And those students and also other attendees that are participating remotely, you may choose students. You have to choose the breakout room. And Dr. McLing, if you would like to join the breakout room with our students, that would be fantastic to have a quick conversation with them also before we come together all in the big room. So with that, let's have some talks at the small tables. So I think everybody is back from the breakout room. Dr. McLing, are you ready for the Q&A?
I sure am.
Wonderful. So let's look around here. Maybe start in the classroom. Who would like to go first? There is a first taker for a giver of a question.
How realistic is it for the United States to be self-sufficient in the next couple of years?
It's not. It's absolutely not. I see no path where the United States, even in more than just a couple of opportunities, say MP Materials is able to meet its goals with the military contract. I don't see it happening. I don't see us moving quickly enough. So yeah, the answer is near zero. But if you ask that question in a different perspective, so for the military, which has a different set of timelines, they are moving much more rapidly to secure their stockpile they need, which is it's like a single capillary in a human body compared to the total we need for our economy. I hope that answers your question well. Is that we're looking at a 5 to 10 year deployment to get us to where we're making a significant dent in some of these areas.
Thank you. And there is a question here. First, let's take John and then Nick.
Hey, so I was wondering if
you had an idea how much, I guess the only answer I'm seeing to compete with China is for the US to subsidize the mining industry itself. And I was wondering how much money do you think the US government would need to invest to make it worth it for these mining companies to do it domestically? And how can you convince the general public of a country with 39 trillion in debt to keep raising that up when it's available elsewhere?
Yeah, you have a really good question. That question is being asked more and more these days. I'll give you a good example of a model. This is Travis's optics on the situation here, and it's not federal policy or even INL policy. But without a secure floor, it is unlikely that we're going to be able to produce and develop the resources to produce the metals that we need to. The risk is just far too high, and there's lots of examples of companies that have tried and failed because of China's manipulation of the market. But here's something, and I talk with policymakers fairly frequently, and I will say the same question to them in a different way. But they'll say, well, we believe in a capitalist economy. We believe that market forces rule the day, and that we need to be able to do things more cheaply. Listen, I want to say first and foremost is that the Chinese are no slouches. I mean, if you look at some of their processing facilities, they are really, really good at what they do. I use the example, they have more metallurgists in the bathroom than we have in the whole country working on this. So don't get the idea that somehow that the Chinese are easily beat. They are not easily beat. But the Farm Bill, if you take a look at the Farm Bill has become the one mechanism that's allowed the U.S. to maintain its dominance in the world agricultural economy. And it's simply a insurance program. So you can take a look at all of the nuances of the Farm Bill and whatnot, but it really becomes an insurance program that allows the farmers not to go bankrupt by growing the food that we need to stay as a global economic power in agriculture. If you take a similar model, so in the agriculture sector, if you want to move soybeans, then you motivate soybeans and you move soybeans through the Farm Bill. If you want more hard red wheat, or you want to export more soft white wheat into the pasta world, you simply do that by how the Farm Bill is put together, and that's what it does. It provides a floor or a security for the agriculture, and there's a way more people in agriculture as a number than there is going to be mining this kind of stuff. So I think it's a reasonable model to build off of. I'm not clever enough to write the legislation for what it looks like, but if we had something like that where there was a security against market manipulation, and again, I say where I'm hard on the Chinese is that the way they exert influence with their minerals, not because they're clever enough to have developed a mineral market that the rest of the world has to bow down to. It's that they've used their technology, developed the technology space to be the best at it in the world. We still are the best at agriculture in the world, and it's because we have a program. So even in a capitalist society where we say we have debt, we don't like these kind of things, the amount of money that goes into supporting agriculture is paid back many times over by keeping the farmer whole and solvent. And I think something similar like that in a mining context may suffice. I don't think the kind of deals like we saw with MP Materials, where in 8 hours you hack out a strategic contract and promise them a floor price on a one-off deal, is the way to do it. I think it's really through a more structured environment, like I don't want to say the Farm Bill is the exact peer, but something that looks more like the Farm Bill. And I was very verbose in my answer there, but it's something I spent a lot of time thinking about. We are going to have to provide some mechanism to protect the investments.
Next question is by Nick.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. You touched on it briefly in the talk and in kind of a little bit in your last answer. But we've been getting a lot in this class about how we need to up the domestic production but we talk very infrequently about how we should up the domestic processing capabilities. You talked about it a little bit. So I'm curious from your perspective, like what balance should we be striking there in terms of balancing production and processing? And like, say you had $1 billion to throw at the problem, like what percent of that would you throw at production and what percent would you throw at processing?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we're just beginning to grapple with that. My if I was king for the day, I'd split it down the middle and invest 50% upstream and 50% midstream. We're starting to see, if you follow the Department of Energy's funding mechanisms for metals, you'll see that there's a notice of federal funding opportunity out right now. It's a $500 million funding opportunity. It is focused at production and meaning mining and refining. So to be an awardee there, you have to have a path to final end product. So that's where I would put it. They both equally need to be dealt with.
I have a question about the circular economy for the solutions of the shortage of the supply chain, because we live in a world that we consume not probably in the most sustainable way. So when we hear these suggestions of circular economy, it seems a little bit to me very idealized. So I wanted to get your input if there are any real industry and research efforts on trying to implement a circular economy model from this mining industry and critical mineral supply chains.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, there are until about 2021, really most of the funding that came out of the federal government for mining related things, for metals, I won't say mining, but for metals related, were associated with circular economy, which is getting materials back into the supply chain. So the whole critical minerals initiative, which INL was part of for 10 years and is now still part of the critical mineral initiative or institute, excuse me, or innovation hub, excuse me, they've changed the name of it, was all about trying to develop new methodologies, technologies, and patents associated with recovering of materials. And so there are all sorts of companies out there now that are doing this, that are recycling materials and putting them back into the supply chain. The problem we have, and I apologize if I've not understood your question in its intended way, but the difficulty you have, so you can recycle the battery out of a Tesla pretty easy because there's a lot of mass there. When it comes to recycling a phone, the transportation costs become problematic, right? To get a phone to a place where it can be then collected and then shipped to a place where it can be then ground into materials that can be separated for metal recovery. It costs more to transport that than what you get out of it. So there's a scale issue there. But Tesla, Redwood, I can go on a number of companies that are doing really good work on the circular economy right now. The problem is that it's a drop in a swimming pool compared to the total volume we need. We do really well recycling copper. We do really well recycling steel and aluminum. It's because there's a lot of mass in the system, and it's easy to move that back into the recycling center. Because let's say you have 2 beers every night, and you take those cans, you put them in a sack, and then when you get 3 sacks full of cans, you just, on your way to work, you drop them by the recycle center. That makes a lot of sense. I've had the same cell phone now since 2018. It's pretty hard for me to build up enough mass of cell phones in my house to drop them off by the local black mass reprocessor. So that's kind of part and parcel of the problem, is that there's that scale problem. But it's certainly something that's been invested in. The federal government spent the last 13 years and spent a lot of money developing some very unique methodologies for recovering these metals.
Next question. Who has a question?
Hi, our group had a question about sort of the risk that you were speaking about earlier. Now, you were speaking about risk in the sense of economic risk of starting a new venture. What we were interested in were your perspectives on the environmental risk, if we have the technologies to sort of avoid some of that potential environmental damage, or what that might look like to you.
Love the question, and it's a question that you that ought to be asked every entity that wants to open up a mine. Our threshold for failure is way higher than it ever has been at any other time. But if you have enough deployments, you're going to have some failures and some consequences. So what's the magnitude of those consequences? Is it a low frequency, high magnitude, or is it a fairly high magnitude, low frequency, or low impact kind of operation? One thing we haven't achieved in this country as of yet, and it's one of the reasons why I harp on this so hard at the very start, with our responsibility to not exploit others for the metals that we need for today, is that we don't have the social license right now in the United States. Even in Idaho or even in the Western states, you still get a lot of opposition for mining, and rightfully so, because those states bore a huge and terrible penalty for some of the mining practices in the past. And so we've lived through that, so we learned from it. But let me tell you, I'll tell you a really short story here, is that I worked at the National Laboratory. In the 1990s, I worked on cleanup of old mine sites, and I worked on cleanup of nuclear waste contamination. Around 2000, we became the nation's nuclear laboratory. And at the time, Chernobyl was in the recent rearview mirror. And I thought, there is no way that a national laboratory can be as successful as a nuclear laboratory. We rolled up into 2012, and about 2012 was when Fukushima happened. And then we were even in more trouble, that nuclear was never going to be a big part of the world's energy supply, right? There was no license to operate. Countries all over the world were getting rid of their nuclear fleets, especially in Europe. And the United States, we started the decommissioning of our light water fleets. And so between 2012 and 2022, things flipped on top. They just completely flipped over. We went from having no social license, and the kind of where you chain yourself to or opposition would change themselves to the front gates of a nuclear facility, to now we're building 5 new reactors at Idaho National Laboratory. TerraPower just received their license and are okay to go forward building their new power plant in Kemmerer, Wyoming. Southern company at Vogtle just built 3 new reactors down there. So what happened? How did the nuclear industry, they became safer and developed new thresholds and procedures to keep the reactors more safe than they had been in previous decades. And number 2 is that people realized that wind and solar were never going to be able to meet the full breadth of the energy needs in the country, and that they needed a firm power supply. Now, we in the mining world, we need to follow kind of a similar pattern, which is we need to gain the social license to mine, meaning that for those of us like myself who love to fish for salmon and steelhead and love to fly fish, and I hunt and fish in the West all over, and it is my passion, to be able to provide assurances to folks like myself and others that the water systems and the environment can be protected, and from harm and from kind of the past actions. So those are certainly, that's part of the reason why it takes you 17 to 25 years to open up a new mine, is because the litigation isn't about your metal price, or it isn't about your team or your permit. It's really about whether you can provide the environmental assurance out there. And so it actually about doubles the time to deploy a mine. Really, really insightful question. And it's things that we should watch and be careful, but also understand that today's miners, by and large, especially those who are doing critical minerals, are mom and pop miner, smaller operations. They live and work in the environment where they're going to be mining, and it doesn't behoove them at all to contaminate the system. So I'm hopeful, I'm cautious, and I want to hold people to account. But I think we're better at it than we used to be.
Right. Thank you, sir.
We might have a question online. If somebody wants to ask a question online, please unmute yourself and go ahead. It doesn't look like. Well, maybe I ask you a question that is related to two of those. We had the recycling circular economy question, and before that, we had also a question regarding subsidy and that you brought this back to legal interventions such as the Agriculture Act. And what do you think might be legal requirements to actually make circular economy or recycling a more substantial part of our economy?
I wish I was more qualified to answer this question. I do spend a lot of my life on airplanes and traveling to different places, and I'll use just the parallel to what I see when I go to other states, like I'm in California right now. Recycling is built into everybody's, whether you're conservative or you're liberal, it doesn't matter. Everybody splits their trash, everybody recycles, everybody follows that protocol. In Idaho, I have one trash can. Right, and if I want to recycle my aluminum or my steel or my paper, I have to take it to a spot by myself and go through that effort. What does it take? I think it takes reasonable. And again, I'm going to say right off the bat, I'm not terribly qualified to answer this question because my experience is elsewhere. But I think it requires common sense types of laws that enable and reward people for doing the right thing. So in California, for instance, if you pay a lot of money, comparatively to anywhere else, for if you have more than one trash can or if you have extra trash, and so but you don't get penalized if you separate your trash and the stuff that can go into the recycling bin goes into the recycling bin. You only have to pay for that trash can that has the materials that are non-recyclable. So they've created an incentive market, which it's a negative incentive, but it is an incentive market where people pay far less to recycle than they would if they didn't recycle. Is there a parallel in when we're talking about metals? Perhaps. When I was a kid, nobody threw away glass bottles, right? I mean, in fact, I used to sneak over to my neighbor's house and try to pilfer their glass bottles because they were worth 10 cents down at the store, and I could buy candy or toys with that money. But nobody threw away a can or a bottle back in those days because there was a monetary incentive to recycle or to put them back to the system. And that was not just a government, that was actually driven by the industries themselves. So I think it requires, it can't be onerous. It has to be motivated, and I think it just can't be that you're a bad person if you don't recycle or you don't contribute to the circular economy, but that you feel some sort of empowerment. Again, I'm really talking out of my skill set here. I just know what I see when I go other places, and being a son of a truck driver that hauled crushed cars and steel to a recycling market. That's how we earned our living. Is that there was an industry built up around a circular economy. It's because my dad could make $1. The guy who crushed the car could make $1. The lady who sold the car to the crusher could make $1. The recycler could make $1. The person who made the new steel could make $1. Everybody was able to monetize that circular economy, and therefore it worked pretty well. It kept my dad in the trucking business for 35 years. So again, I'm mostly just kind of wandering around here looking for an answer that I don't really have at my ready.
I'm back on. The common thing was that it's a system. You talk to the system, and that we talked about the system also in the mining and product producing and the entire supply chain thing. Well, we are at the end of our time here. Thank you, Dr. McLing. First of all, also to make this happen in spite of all the hindrances that you experienced today. We are so glad you were here. Thank you all, and a round of applause also from the classroom here to you. Thank you very much. And with that, we close the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it. I would rather be in Boise for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.